Hi, this is Ron Ball, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Choose Greatness, your key to a happier, better life. We have had such tremendous response to this program. I am excited about all of you who are contacting us, and I want you to continue doing that. We want to hear from you, and you can tell us anything. We are your partners, your friends in developing greatness in your family. So whether you're a mom, a dad watching this program, a kid, a young person, you're a part of this team with us, and we are your resource advocates. We are here to help you be better, greater, and fulfill God's purpose for your life. On the way here, I sat by a young man. We were flying from Baltimore to this location for filming, and he began to talk to me about his life. And it was a remarkable story that was so unfortunately typical of many, many people. He was a young man. He already had gone through different relationships. He was helping a stepson of another woman he was involved with, and yet he had a great sincerity about him. And I realized as we talked that he just had no spiritual training on how to develop a walk with God, how to know Christ, or how to work with the women in his life. He had no consciousness of how to rear great kids or help the next generation. He was confused. Well, the purpose of our show today is to end that confusion. I know your kids are in a battlefield. I know they're in a war zone every day, and the culture is opposed to godliness. Well, I'm excited because I have a guest today, Jeff Keaton. Jeff, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And Jeff is an advocate for children all over America. He has a wonderful organization called Renew a Nation, and his emphasis, his focus is on your kids. He wants to do something great to help children fulfill God's purpose. So I know you're going to love this show. And Jeff, you have so much going on in your life and ministry. God has done so much with you and through you that we want you on multiple programs. So we're going to do several and have you go through a lot of information because I know you're loaded with it. You're filled up with all kinds of things. So Jeff is located in Roanoke, Virginia. And you'll hear more about his organization, how to contact him as this show progresses. But I am so eager for him to give us some information. So Jeff, what I want you to tell our audience is how did you become passionate over America's children, over America's young people? This is a major need, and I want to hear how you got involved in this. So tell us about that.
Well, two things really impacted my life and got me to the place where I became so passionate that I can only do this now almost. First of all, when my two girls were born. I have two daughters, Juliana and Heidi, and I remember when Juliana was born and then Heidi, and I was holding them, and like any father, I was like, you know, I will protect these girls at all costs. Nobody better touch my girls, just like all dads and moms feel. And as they begin to get a little bit older, the question of, you know, how am I going to train their minds? Who am I going to allow to influence them? Those are the questions that begin to come to my mind. And when it was time for Juliana to go to school, I was living in an inner city situation where the schools just were not really safe, to be honest with you. And so I really started wrestling with, you know, what am I going to do to educate her? Because it dawned on me one day that my daughters were gifts from God. They didn't belong to me. They totally belonged to Him. And that someday when I stand before Him, I was going to give an account for how I had trained them, how I had raised them, and did I help them to know, love, and serve Jesus. So actually, I told my girls from the earliest days they could remember, I said, listen, I have one primary mission for your life. We brought you into this world so that you will know, love, and serve Jesus with a passion. Okay.
Excellent.
Now people said to me, well, didn't you try to, you know, encourage them to become this or that and go to Harvard? No, I wanted them to be excellent in everything they did, but primarily I wanted them to know, love, and serve Jesus, because if they know, love, and serve Jesus, they're going to do exactly what He wants them to do, and that's all I really wanted.
Amen.
And so I then began to think about, you know, I'm protecting them physically. I made sure they had food and diapers and everything, you know. But then I began to think, I also must protect their minds. I must protect them from any negative influence that would cause them not to know, love or serve Jesus. And so I really set out to evaluate all the influences that were going to come into their life. And then the second thing that really turned my passion towards this was in my first pastorate in an inner city church. We were seeing...
and that was in Florida, wasn't
yes,
it? Yeah,
was,
where we are right now.
Yeah, it was in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami-Fort Lauderdale area, inner city. They sent me to this first church out of college that I couldn't hurt. It was already pretty much dead. I mean, there were a few wonderful people there, but it was, it had seen better days. And so they sent me down there, and literally, I just looked at my community, and it was desperate. It was a desperate community. Drugs and alcohol permeated the whole community, and fights and guns, and it was just tragic. And I felt like the Lord said to me, at first I was a little shell-shocked. I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in a rural setting, and I land down here in South Florida, and I'm like, whoo, this is kind of different. And actually, in the first year, I was driving down 441 there in Hollywood, Florida, and I said to the Lord, why did you put me here? How long do I have to be here? Am I just here to learn how to preach, and then I get to go back up north where I know everybody? Because I'd had some larger churches recruiting me to come on staff, and this one down here had never paid a pastor in the history of the church. And here was their job offer.
That was a good start.
Oh, it was excellent. They said, we'll try to pay you something, and we'll try to find you a place to live. And I had a wife and a baby. But anyhow, we started seeing a whole lot of drug addicts and alcoholics come to Christ. And they were bringing their children into my church. And their children, because of the lifestyle of their parents, were just lost. So we started leading the children to Christ and the teenagers to Christ. And obviously they were not people who had the means to pay for a Christian education. So all of our students were in secular schools, public schools. And rather than bury our head in the sand, I decided that we would get involved in every public school we possibly could. So my student ministries pastor was the head of a Christian club in every middle and senior high school in Broward County, Florida at that time, 32 of them.
My goodness.
And because of that, he kept inviting me to go speak in these Christian clubs. Right. And it was there that I began to see the worldview battle that was raging.
Now, let me interrupt you and ask you a question. Our audience is filled with moms and dads who care about what you're saying. And if you're a mom or dad watching this, I want you to really pay attention to this next point, because you mentioned worldview. And if you're not familiar with that term, many of you are, but if you're not familiar with that term, it means exactly what it says. It's how you view the world. Mm-hmm. And that's crucial to the way you operate in the world. So what did you encounter when you said they had worldview challenges? What kind of attitudes or opinions did you pick up in those moms and dads and those kids?
Well, a perfect example is two 16-year-old kids who were liking each other walked in my office. We had led their parents to Christ, and we had led them to Christ. And these kids had made a commitment to be sexually pure before marriage. And they came into my office one day and they said, Pastor, you've taught us that we should save, this till marriage, but all day long at school, here's the question we get, because everybody knows we're a couple. They walk up all day long and say, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? And they said, when we tell them no, we're waiting till marriage, they said, Pastor, they mock us. They think we've lost our minds. And so then the teenagers began to pretty much tell us that everything you're teaching us here at church, we're being taught the opposite at school, whether it's through peer pressure or actually some adults. And so I began to dream right then and there. I thought, I get these kids for about 2 hours a week. What if I had them for 35 hours a week? What if I had them all day long? Mm-hmm. I began to say I could really shape how they view the world. I could give them a biblical foundation. I could teach them God's view on all the important subjects. And I believe I could raise up a group of world changers. And I was not able to do that in South Florida. But when God called me to take a church in Virginia, it was kind of a shock, because I got into my first board meeting and I had a county commissioner on my board who was over all public education in my county. And I asked what was the best Christian school to send my daughter to. And he looked at me and said, why would you waste your money on a Christian school?
Waste your money.
That's what he said. And so I didn't know. I was from the inner city. I'd been in the inner city. And he said, our rural schools up here are nothing like you're used to. Go down here and try them out. And I did. And listen, there are so many wonderful Christians working in public education and secular education. And I like to say to them, if God has called you to do that, it is a high and holy calling. You are a missionary in a world where it's hard to verbalize the gospel. And I pray for you, and I pray God anoints you, and keep loving those kids and doing the great things you're doing.
Well, again, just one moment. A lot of our viewers have kids in public schools, not because they want their children in public schools. It's a financial decision.
Yes.
They cannot afford to go to a private situation. What would you tell those parents? How can they help their children if their kids are in a secular situation? What's the best thing they can do for them?
Well, to be honest with you, you've got to understand that all secular education its foundations are not biblical. Not that everything they teach is not biblical, but it doesn't come from a biblical foundation. And so if you have no other choice, you can't homeschool your children from a biblical worldview, you can't put them in a Christian school, and there are a lot of people like that. They want something else, but this is what they have to do. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to make sure, there's really 3 pillars to making sure that a kid comes out at 18 or 20 years old with a passion for Jesus: the home, the church, and the school. Now, I have seen that when you have all 3 of those working in the same direction, teaching God's truth, you have a very high chance of having a kid who loves Jesus and believes in the authority of Scripture. However, in a situation where your child has to go to a school that doesn't teach a biblical worldview, you better have the home right and you better have the church right. So at home, parents whose kids are not in Christian schools, they have to literally do a significant and intentional work of teaching their kids God's truth, because there's no possible way they can offset every falsehood that their kids are being taught. So I had a close friend who called me one day knowing that I'm into education, and she said her son is blind, okay? And because he's blind, she decided to mainstream him. She didn't put him in a school for the blind. She mainstreamed him in a school, but she had to do a lot of work to make that happen. So one night she's reading his secular textbook, literature textbook. He's like 16 years old. And she was shocked because there they had printed Jonathan Edwards' sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God.
One of the great sermons in American history.
Exactly. And so at first she was excited. Wow, a secular textbook. Well, she read the sermon to him, and then after the sermon, here's how they categorized that sermon. They said, preachers like Jonathan Edwards in the 1700s used sermons like this to manipulate people so they would join their religion. And so what I say to parents is that there are what I call thousands of false assumptions and assumptive language used in secular education. And if you're not being very intentional about teaching your children the truth, they won't even know what's not.
It's kind of like an educational version of fake news that we're having right now.
Exactly.
It's
it
going
really
on everywhere. Well, again, if you're a parent, if you're a mom or a dad, and you are listening to this program, this man is highlighting something urgent. Urgent. Your children are precious. God has given you your children, and the potential for damage or blessing is enormous.
Absolutely.
Because if they learn the wrong things and make the wrong decisions, they could have a bad life. You don't want that for your children. You love your children.
Yes.
So Jeff mentioned something about worldview again when it comes to sexual morality, because you also mentioned a moment ago the couple who were pressured and disrespected because they were doing godly things and not giving in to sexual immorality. Here's a mom and dad concerned about their kids. Their kids are now starting to date. Maybe your children are 14, 15, 16. And of course, when I was growing up, my parents wouldn't even let me date till I was 16. So I think that's altered dramatically. Say something to those moms and dads. You can just say it to them.
Well, there are really 4 major influences on your children in the development of their worldview. First of all, there's the home. And as a pastor, a senior pastor for 18 and a half years, far too many of our families were not being really intentional in the home. So let me just mention a book that I didn't mean to mention today, but it's written by a gentleman who leads our church and family ministry, Dr. Josh Mulvihill. He just released a book called Preparing Your Children for Marriage. And it covers all of the issues, sexual issues, and it's not a book to teach them when they're 17 years old how to, be ready for marriage. It's a book that helps you teach them from 3, 4, 7, 9, 10 years old God's view of marriage, God's roles for men and women, God's view of gender issues, God's view of all the sexual issues. And so you're going to have to be very intentional in the home. The second influence should be the church. But unfortunately, far too many churches are not intentional enough to really make a significant worldview impact on the kids. If they only have them around for an hour or two a week, it's hard to make a big influence.
And they may not be dealing with the real issues anyway in the church.
Exactly. I mean, I love the story of David and Goliath, but when we tell that 100 times in 12 years, you know what I'm saying? Unless there's some bigger moral to it, the kids get it. We need to talk about the real issues.
Right.
The third dominant influence in the development of a child's worldview is media and pop culture. And I read a statistic some time ago that said from 6 to 18 years old, a child will spend between 15 and 20,000 hours watching television, movies, surfing the internet, playing video games, and listening to music. And so they go to church in those same years, 6 to 18, about 1,000 to 1,500 hours if they go once a week.
So a dramatic lessening of influence.
10 times more influence from social media and pop culture. Okay, I've had many Christian parents come to me and say, I took my kid to church. I told him the truth at home. And I literally had a mother call me this past spring, and she was in an absolute panic. A wonderful Christian family, and all of a sudden their 17-year-old son says he's going to be a woman. And she said, we took him to church. But what she discovered was that he had been surfing the internet and had gotten into a whole bunch of, crazy stuff. And then at school, they had been encouraging his desires. And here was a mother who was in an absolute panic about what to do. By the time she got a hold of me, we were a little late in the ball game. Now, God can do anything. And I mean, God, I challenged her to pray and seek God's help, and He would move. But anyhow, so that's a big influence. And the fourth influence that most people fail to realize is that a child between 6 and 18, kindergarten and 12th grade, will go to school for 16,000 hours. So they actually spend more time at school than in any other activity. And I still have a lot of Christian parents who don't believe that school is having a major worldview impact on their child.
Oh my goodness, it's huge.
It's huge. And so I like to tell people that there is no neutral school when it comes to worldview. Every school, I like to say this, and people, it kind of shocks people, every school is a religious school. So it doesn't matter if it's public or private. Every school is a religious school because all schools teach us where we came from, why we're here, what's going to happen to us when we die, who makes the rules, who the heroes are. That's what we call the makeup of a worldview. And so every single school in America is teaching a worldview of some kind. They're teaching doctrine. I like to say every school indoctrinates children. I have people say, well, I don't want my kid in a religious school where they will indoctrinate them. Every school indoctrinates children because what is doctrine? Doctrine is simply what we believe.
It's a statement of what a belief, yes.
A set of beliefs.
Well, this is very interesting. Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
And let me set the question up first. We're living in a culture of censorship where the forces against godliness that want to rip your children apart, and I mean tear your kids apart, those forces want to shut us up. They don't want us to speak truth. And so they use intimidation, they use threats, they use social pressure to try to make us be quiet. Do you see that kind of censorship in schools, in secular schools, where they not only deliver a secular worldview, but they actually are hostile to a Christian worldview? They try to make sure that the kids don't hear that. Do you run into that?
Oh, absolutely. So the young man that I mentioned who decided he wanted to become a lady, he went to his school and said, my mom and dad's Christian beliefs are going to cause me to take my life because they won't let me be who I am. The school called the father, who's a retired military guy, and they said, get over here. And he got over there, and they said, you better take this son to the psychiatric ward. And so it's a long story, but then the psychiatrist calls the father and says, your Christian faith is going to cause your son to take his life. You need to abandon your beliefs on this issue. Well, the father wouldn't abandon his beliefs, and they took that boy and they put him in the home of a gay couple, and the state did. And that 17-year-old boy went to school with his siblings, who were still in the Christian home, dressed like a girl every single day. And so, yes, there is a tremendous hostility towards the Christian faith. All of a sudden, what his parents were teaching him, they were telling them they were going to be liable for whatever he did, essentially, because of their Christian
Well, you're
beliefs.
talking legal issues here.
Yes.
They
arrested the father.
That's what I anticipated.
Yes. Now, I don't know how that case has ended, but there was no accusations of abuse, physical abuse.
Do you know
nothing
what
like that.
state that was in?
I want to be a little careful. It was in the state of Virginia. I will
Okay.
tell you that because I don't want to identify.
No, I understand. I
Yeah.
understand. And we'll be careful about that.
Yeah.
And I totally respect that.
Yeah.
One thing I want you to know as a Christian mom and dad who care for your kids, I want you to understand the absolute importance and depth of what Jeff just explained. Because if we do not become vocal, active, and assertive as Christian parents, if we don't protect and guard our rights as Christian parents, then the other side will use government influence to take away children. Now, I'm not saying that will always happen. I'm not trying to be doomsday here,
Right.
but that is an example of what can happen in our culture. And you cannot stand by and allow that to happen to any Christian parent. You say, well, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to be a problem for me. And I understand your thinking on that. But remember that anything that can happen to a parent can possibly happen to you.
That's right.
And so you want to be politically active. You want to support candidates who guard our rights as Christians.
Absolutely.
You don't want to support a candidate because they are a representative of a particular party. You want to support a candidate that's a representative of the views you believe in.
Exactly.
And that is something we'll deal with later. We're going to have some more shows with Jeff. And I'm not trying to sound scary, neither is Jeff.
No.
But this is an example of the possibilities out there, and this is very serious. This is a war for the minds and souls of your children. Now, Jesus said in John 8:22 that the devil is a liar, and when he speaks a lie, he speaks his native language, that he is a liar and the father of lies, and that's all he is known for is deception. Well, this ultimately, don't you think, Jeff, is a spiritual issue,
Absolutely
a spiritual
it is.
warfare. Do you find that parents do need to be involved in their school boards, at their local level? Now, we're going to deal with homeschooling and Christian education on our next show.
Sure.
But right now we're talking about parents with kids in secular situations. In your opinion, should they be involved, as I said, on school boards? Should they make their voice known? Not in an antagonistic way,
No.
but in a clear voice.
Yes.
What's your view on that?
If your child is going to be in a public school, you must be involved. You must be involved in the parent-teacher organizations. You must know their teachers. You must go in and help. Don't just be the one that's always negative, but go in and help.
Don't just be a complainer.
Yeah, if you're just a complainer, they'll tune you out and you'll never make any headway. However, you really need to know your principals and to let them know that you're there to help, but that also, when there's a problem, you challenge them. I had a public school teacher in my church, and she came to me one day and she said, they've just told us that we're all going to start teaching, homosexuality in our school. She was a third grade teacher. She'd been there 30 years. And so she and her fellow teachers got together. This was in Roanoke County, Virginia. And they got together and said, we won't do it. And the school board backed down. I mean, they literally backed down. They also went through that little thing where they wouldn't stand for the pledge. They told the whole school that you cannot make the kids do the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. She was the only teacher in the school that made her kids do it. She said, other teachers would walk by and say, you're going to get in trouble. She said, I dare them to fire me. I'll have every news outlet on the stairs. And you know what? She was a great teacher, had been there over 30 years, and she was willing to stand up, and she won some of those battles. So absolutely, if your kids are in the public school, you need to be engaged.
But you need to be positive. And you
Yes.
need to be a friend of the school, not
Yes.
just an enemy.
Absolutely.
That's very important. Now, very quickly, you have a magazine you want to make available to our viewers. Can you, we'll put that on the screen. Your magazine is called
The Renew a Nation Review.
Renew a Nation Review. What will that do for parents?
So in this magazine, there are tremendous articles to help you understand the importance of giving your child a biblical worldview and some of the how-tos. So it's really simple. If you'll contact us at renewanation.org.
It's on your screen.
Okay? If you'll contact us, we will send you a free copy. As long as they're in stock, we'll send you a free copy of this magazine, and it'll be a great blessing to you.
Well, we're going to have Jeff back on. As you can see, we are, as they say, scratching the surface. There is so much more to say. And your children, as I said earlier, are precious. Precious beyond measure, beyond calculation. This is your opportunity to bring kids up in a way that they not only are safe and protected, but they become godly warriors themselves. We cannot afford to lose this nation. That's why your organization is called Renew a Nation.
Absolutely.
And I honor that. The organization I'm president of is called Choose Greatness. And it's very compatible with what you're presenting. So we're going to have Jeff back on. We don't have enough time to cover everything today, but I want to add something and make it available to all of you. Our new book, our new version of the book, Choose Greatness, is now available. You'll see a copy on your screen, and you can go to choosegreatness.com, choosegreatness.com, and you can order your copy or as many copies as you need of Choose Greatness, because that book is full of stories that will challenge young people. In fact, it is written so that children, 8th graders, 7th graders, 6th graders can read it and understand the principles that are contained in that book. And then I want you as a parent to order an audio set called The Success Test. This will help you know what to work on with your children. Are they successful? Are they having the right view of money and economics? Do they understand family and principles that God has made available in Scripture? Well, the success test will reveal what they're good at, what you need to work on, where they need to improve, what you need to target in your life and the lives of your children. So, Choose Greatness, the book, and the Success Test, the audio set. And you can get both at choosegreatness.com. Now, Jeff, thank you for being here. We're going to have you on. In fact, we're going to have a series of shows with Jeff, so you want to stay tuned. God bless you, and remember, whatever you do, wherever you go, for the glory of God, remember to always choose greatness.